Perfect.
Okay, fine. Just 1 second, please. Fine. So, thank you so much, Jose and Louis, for inviting me here. I'm going to be talking on the management of keratoconus using CAIRS and CACXL, and it's mostly to do with advanced keratoconus. But as you'll see, these can also, at least the CAIRS part, can also be used for less advanced cases. So I must say at the outset that I do have a patent pending for special refines, devices, and processes used to create the CARES segments, and also for the CARES segments and various other types of shaped corneal segments. Now, CARES is an acronym that I coined for the term corneal allogenic intrastromal ring segments, and this is a technique that I started. Basically to treat keratoconus. Now, when you look at the prevalence of keratoconus, it's always been, estimated as about 1 in 2000. But a recent study in the Netherlands found it to be as high as 1 in 375. And we know that there was also a study in Riyadh in pediatric population where it was found to be as high as 1 in 21. So a reasonable assumption might be that about 1 in 200 have some subtle abnormal findings. And so we are now coming to know that keratoconus is a much more prevalent and common disease than we have thought it to be. So we will come across more and more cases, and especially the good thing, of course, is that as our diagnostic capabilities improve, we are going to come across milder and milder cases or more early cases. But even now, all of us, I'm sure, come across advanced cases as well. The current treatment of keratoconus, mild or advanced, as long as it's progressing, is to use corneal cross-linking, of course, depending on the case. Advanced cases may need other treatments as well. But if it's mild, you definitely have to try and stop the progression with corneal cross-linking. Now, cross-linking by itself, however, has a very limited role in improving the corneal topography or improving the vision. What it basically does is to stabilize the cornea, and to some extent, it may improve the corneal topography, but not dramatically. So, if you just have isolated cross-linking alone in a patient who's advanced to who's more than a mild case, a moderate or a severe case, the patients may be unhappy with just the isolated cross-linking alone, because all of these keratoconus patients we know have coma and other higher order aberrations. And so even if the milder cases are reading 6 by 6 or 20 by 20, it's possible that they are not seeing, the quality of vision is not good, they're not happy with what they're seeing because of all the chromatic aberrations. And so all of them would definitely want to have some improvement in their quality of vision. And one of the ways that this has been done by in the past and now also is using ICRS, or intracorneal ring segments. South America, of course, has a huge contribution to this technique and in developing it, and the world is really thankful for that. Uh, Commercially available ICRS include Intacs, Kera rings, Ferrara rings, Mayo rings, the Bisantis segments, and various other types of intrastromal corneal ring segments. But one thing that you notice about all these is that these are made of PMMA or plastic, and they're effective in improving the quality of vision, but sometimes they can be associated with problems also, especially in more advanced cases and when indications are not followed properly. So you have a limited set of indications for intracorneal ring segments, which are synthetic segments. And I'm sorry, this thing is just coming in between my screen again and again. I'm just trying to move it out. All right. So ICRS, synthetic ICRS can be associated with complications. And some of them include, I'm sure anyone who's done a large number of cases would have seen these complications in their career. And this includes stromal necrosis, MELS, migration of the ICRS. You can see here a case that migrated. You can have intrusions of the synthetic ICRS. You can have extrusions outwards and both inwards, overlying melt, which may result in having to remove it and leading on to a loss of stromal tissue there. You can sometimes have infectious keratitis, which might even require the need for penetrating keratoplasty. So though it gives you good visual results, the problem is that it can be associated with complications, and some studies have reported as high a rate of 30% rate of complications. And obviously, when you do it in more advanced cases where the stroma is not thick enough in the zone of implantation, your rate of complication is also going to be much more higher. Therefore, synthetic ICRS have generally been limited to only moderate cases, maybe 55 to 58 diopters. I'm not sure how far it is being done in South America now. But generally, that is kept as a limit, because you do have to have sufficient stroma over the synthetic ICRS to prevent these complications. And sometimes, even if you have done that, with the if the disease is not stabilized, if there's continued progression, if the patient rubs his eyes, or just because of the presence of PMMA or plastic within the eye, you can have long-term complications such as Mel's and necrosis, even in patients who were okay to start out with and who you thought were good candidates for introducing the ICRS, synthetic ICRS. So here's a report that had come, that was published, which talked about a synthetic ICRS, which many years later led on to intrusion into the anterior chamber and resulted in the development of an acute hydrops in the patient. And this author had written that possibly CARES is likely to reduce the probability of such complications. Now, what is CARES? I want you to just see that this is a double-bladed refine which I have designed and is available commercially now. And what we do is here take a donor corneal tissue and create this ring of stromal tissue. So basically, if you look at it, what it basically is, it's a synthetic, it's an ICRS, intrastromal corneal ring segments, but it's not synthetic. It's basically prepared from human donor tissue. So it's allogenic, and therefore, of course, it's much more biocompatible and safer to put into the eye. So here's again that refine which I just mentioned. As you can see, it's got 2 concentric blades. And what you do here, let me go back to the beginning of the video. You have to make sure that you have removed the epithelium completely from the donor corneoscleral rim. This is a donor rim which is mounted onto an artificial anterior chamber. Once you have removed all the epithelium, you go ahead and remove all the endothelium as well. So now what you're left with is pure stroma. And then you go and center it there and punch out this ring of stromal tissue. And then what you do is cut this stromal tissue into 2. These are instruments which I have designed and which can be used to very easily, as you can see, push that stromal tissue into the femtosecond laser dissected channel. So it's really simple. As you can see here, it goes in easily. By convention, you would think that it would be difficult to put these segments in. But as you can see, it goes in really easily. You just push it in. And then if you are, whatever your conventional way of treatment is, if you like to do cross-linking immediately, you can proceed with that. If you like to wait for some time and then do cross-linking, you can do that. It depends on what your conventional way of management is. I generally combine both of them at the same sitting. So here in this case, I've removed the epithelium and then started off cross-linking as well. And if I'm doing cross-linking at the same sitting, I also generally soak the soak the CARES segments also in riboflavin before implanting them in, so that they also get cross-linked well as well. So here's another video.
Susan, sorry to interrupt you. That's the technique that you usually use, just pushing them in, because I saw some of your videos that you tie them with a ICRS with a segment and you just pull it into the tunnel. What usually you do?
So this technique, I'm not sure who asked me this question, was it Louis or Jose, but basically this technique I developed now many years back. And when I started out, I was wondering how to put these in, because intuitively it would seem that corneal stroma is soft tissue. You need something rigid that you can push in. So I tried many techniques, and initially when I started out, actually the first thing that I did was I would have these incisions, the femtosecond laser dissected channels, and I would put 2 incisions. And because I assumed that it's going to be difficult to push it in, I would put the segment halfway straddling the incision. So half of the segment would be on this side and half of the segment would be on this side, and similar on the other side. So that's how I started out with. And then I thought, that it's probably going to be better if we have it fully in. So then the next idea that we thought about was to use an intact segment to tie it to, and then pull the intacts all the way through, so that this would actually follow the segment into the channel. And that worked well. And then after that, we also did the 330-degree segments, and I actually made a pigtail kind of a probe. I got it designed. I designed it and got it manufactured, which would give me 330, even 360-degree, ability to implant completely. And then finally, as we were doing more and more cases, we realized that really it can take the question. What we've done is made the channel slightly wider. And we found that just coating it with a little riboflavin, you don't even need to coat it. Even just pushing it in allows you to just take it in. You might have a little difficulty in the initial bit, in the very first part of where you're just inserting it in the first part of the segment into the incision. But the minute the first part has gone in, and that you can generally do using a tooth forceps, The rest can just be slid in. So as you saw, so right now to answer that question, I don't use that technique of, for using an intact segment to pull it in anymore, because it's really very easy now. Sorry. It's really
Great.
very easy now. All you have to do is just push it in using this. And these are basically cataract instruments. This is a wire rod used for cataract, which I've just bent out of shape. And you can see that you push it in. This is a different video from the one I showed you earlier. And then you just, slide it in further forwards and it just moves in. Now, one thing you have to be careful of when you do this is that you should not have a twisting of the segment. So you have to look for that. So in this case, as you can see, there was a twisting of the segment. If that happens, it's very simple to set it right. What you do is you just take it and untwist it. That's it. And you can see that's got the whole thing untwisted. And then you go ahead and just continue with the surgery as earlier you were doing. So push it in, slide it in, and then just trim off whatever is excess that you don't need. And you can go in with a reverse Sinski from the other side and just pull it into position again. So this is how the surgery is generally done. And as you can see, it's really simple, Louis. It's really not difficult to do at all.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, here's a post-op. And you can see another thing I want to mention here is that I implanted at 50% depth. So you know that when you implant synthetic ICRS, you need to go deep. You have to have sufficient stroma above the segment. So generally you aim for about 75 to 80% of stroma above the segment, which means that you are implanting it really deep. The amount of effect that you get thereby may be lesser. And also you limit yourself to a certain population of keratoconic patients. You cannot apply this treatment to very advanced cases, because you would not have that amount of stromal tissue above it to keep it safe. But in this case, since it's allogenic, I implanted at 50% depth. All my surgeries are done at 50%. You can see it's not deep at all. It's at 50% depth. And that gives me very good results as well. You can see a very quiet eye. Two segments are there, one above and one below. And these patients generally do very well. You don't need a long-term steroid application for them as well. And post-operatively, they have very quiet eyes in the immediate post-op, even on day one. If you've done cross-linking combined, of course, and I generally do epi off cross-linking, so then you would have some haze secondary to the cross-linking. But if it's a pure CAIRS, then you don't generally have any kind of issues.
Susan, another question. Sorry. Usually the ICRS, we use them to, we usually put them at about 75, 80% depth. Right. So you used for these CAIRS about 50%, right? Is there any specific reason why is a little bit shallower, or would you?
Oh, well, I make it shallower simply because I believe that it gets me a better result, because I'm more superficial. So you get more effect on the anterior cornea. And so that just basically translates into a better effect or a visual result as well as a topographic result for the patient. So that's the reason I put it at 50%.
Okay.
Hello?
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, we just saw this. Here's another patient with two semicircular CAIRS, and you can see this patient had also undergone cross-linking as well. And you can see that those two segments over there on either side. Now, when you come to synthetic segments, again, the disadvantages include complications such as stromal thinning or necrosis, melt, extrusions, intrusions. We mentioned all that, corneal neovascularization, and so on and so forth. And we also said that it can be implanted only if there's a minimum stromal thickness of 450 microns in the zone of implantation. But they cannot be there for implanting very thin areas. You have to implant it deep, so you have limited effect. Also, it's contraindicated in patients with autoimmune immunodeficiency diseases, etc., etc. And it may not be applicable in South America, I'm not sure, but or Peru. But in US, you would need a specific FDA approval for each thickness and each arc length of synthetic segments. Whereas when you come to CAIRS, these are natural implants. They're made from allogenic human corneal tissue. So it's biocompatible, biointegrable. It avoids all complications that we mentioned earlier. And also the biggest advantage is that it can be implanted in very thin and very steep corneas in advanced cases, because you're not going to have any overlying melt or necrosis. Also, you can implant it more superficially, so you get a greater effect as we just mentioned. And you can put arc segments of up to 360 degrees also easily. Now, you know that when you try to do these 210-degree segments of synthetic segments, or even more, segments that go more circularly all around, it becomes difficult to implant because the direction of your push is different from the direction that it has to move forwards into. So, whereas on the other hand, these can be easily implanted by just pushing it in. And if you have two incisions, you can easily take it all around. Or if you don't want two incisions, what you could do is use that pigtail probe, which I've designed, and just pull it through all around, and this segment follows very easily. So it has a lower risk of complications. As I said, it doesn't need so much of stroma above it. So you can also implant it in cases which are very mild cases of keratoconus. So that's another very good advantage, and it makes available a much wider pool of patients where you can do this surgery. Now, indications are huge. Almost all patients with keratoconus do need to undergo treatment since it's progressive. If it's stable, of course, you don't have to, but you can combine cross-linking with CAIRS in a large number of patients. It can be implanted in already cross-linked patients to improve their vision further. So that's another thing you can do. And it can also be implanted in patients who have not undergone cross-linking but who are completely stable, again, to improve their vision. And though I have not done it in keratoglobus, pellucid marginal degeneration, post-classic ectasia, and so on, I'm sure you should be able to do it easily in these conditions also, just like you can use Intacs for these conditions. And the other very big use that I've found for CARES, and which also other people around the world are now using it for, is to treat melts and migration, extrusion, intrusion, etc. That is complications secondary to Intacs and other synthetic segments. So here's a patient who had a synthetic segment related melt. And you can compare these two eyes. The one on the left hand side is ICRS, which has developed a complication. The one on the right hand side, you can see, is a quiet eye post CARES. And just showing you this surgery, this was the patient who had melt secondary to, let me just go back to that, melt secondary to a synthetic implant. And you can see the overlying cornea is almost not there. So what we do first is prepare a CARES segment. So remove the epithelium, remove the endothelium, and then you cut this segment out, this ring out. Now you go back to the patient's eye, and you'll see that that segment is almost exposed. There's a thin layer of epithelium, and generally the area of exposure is generally much larger than what you see because the epithelium is covering some of the segments. So you can see that that's actually a much larger exposure than you had initially thought it to be. You can pull it out, the segment out. And now the problem is, if you just left it at this, you would have this area of stromal loss, which would also act as an entry point for infections and other complications. So here's a very beautiful, way that you can solve this problem for this patient. Take the CARES segment and cut it into whatever thickness you want it to, and then you can just push it in, And so you have a topographic answer to your problem, as well as a anatomical answer to the problem for the problem of overlying or of tissue, absence of tissue. Now you can see what I've done is I've anchored the segment on both ends, which is the sutures are passing through the segments, but in the middle I'm using just bridging sutures, which means that the sutures are going only from end to end of the host tissue, not through the CARES segment. So they're just holding the CARES segment in place. I had fibrin glue with me, so I've also used some fibrin glue in this case. And then you put a BCL on top. And that's the end of surgery. And this is a very nice way you can treat these patients. Here's the immediate post-op of that patient. And here's after some time. So this was about 1-2 months later, I think. And this is about 4 months later or 3 months later, maybe, after the sutures also removed. So you can see in this eye, this patient has one intact segment, which is from the previous surgery, and one CARES segment, which is from the treatment for the intact melt. So this is a very useful way that you can use these segments. Post-operative medications is similar to routine post-op cataract regimen, which means that they really don't need heavy doses of steroids. I use whatever I do for cataracts, which is about steroids 6 times a day for 4 weeks, and then 4 or 2 times a day for another 2 weeks. You don't need long-term steroids like you do for DALC or penetrating keratoplasties, just because the risk of rejection is actually very low. And this is again a question that's always asked to me: what happens if it rejects? And the answer is that it really, the risk is really, really low. All of us who are corneal surgeons know that when you do DALC is also basically a transplantation of stromal tissue, but in that case, you also have epithelium. And we know that even with DALC itself, your risk of rejection is extremely low. It's only when you also transplant the endothelium and do a penetrating keratoplasty that your risk of rejection rises. Even for DALCs, the time that you give steroids post-operatively is quite low. I give it for 6 months, but there are people who give it for 2 months, 2.5 months, and they're perfectly happy with the results. Now, when you compare all the already well-known good results of DALC with CARES, you know that CARES, the volume of tissue transferred is even lesser than DALC, much lesser than DALC. So first of all, you have a very low level of stromal transfer. And second thing is that there is no epithelial transfer also, unlike in DALC. And of course, there's no endothelial transfer at all. And the third thing is that this tissue that you're placing, the CARES tissue, is placed right in the middle of host stromal tissue, which means the host is surrounding it on all sides. So whatever keratocyte repopulation happens into this tissue, it happens very fast from all sides. So it's happening from above, below, and from the sides. So the donor keratocytes are replaced very rapidly with host keratocytes, and it becomes antigenicity becomes negligible very fast. In addition to that, these segments are placed far from the limbus. They're placed far from limbal blood vessels. Unlike DALC, there are no sutures that go close to the limbus. There's nothing that can incite neovascularization. So all of these reasons together gives you a very low risk of rejection. And even in the worst case scenario, let's say that it does reject, it's really doesn't matter because these segments are outside the visual axis and they're not going to affect vision at all. Now, here are okay, some more post-ops of some more patients. And if you see, this is one of my very initial cases, and you can see here the segment is actually going on either side, Jose, as we had discussed earlier. This is the segment placed on either side of the incision. That's how it started out with, and then we shifted to using other techniques and getting it so that it doesn't straddle the incision. So these are anti-segment OCTs, and this is how it works. It decreases anterior curvature and it increases the posterior curvature, both of which add on to decreasing the spherical equivalent, to decreasing the myopia for the patient. Oh, this is a very beautiful video which I have got courtesy Jack Parker, who's in USA and who's also doing CARES for keratoconus for some time now. So you can see this is a comparison of the pre and post-op of the patient, and you can see the decrease in the steepness of the patient that's pre-op, and this is post-op, and you can see the regularization and the flattening of the cornea that has been brought about post using CARES implantation. So, fine. Mechanism, it acts on the Baracus thickness law. So basically, whenever you add thickness to the periphery of the cornea, a flattening effect is got, and whatever result you get is proportional to the thickness of the implant. And it's also depends on the optic zone that you're using. Thicker the segments, the higher results you get. The smaller the optic zone, the better results you get. That's how it works. The ways that it, what all it does on the cornea is it flattens the steep cornea, it regularizes the topography, and centralizes the cone. So all these are, of course, things that also synthetic segments do. Decreases aberrations, refractive error, decreases regular and irregular astigmatism, improves uncorrected and best corrected visual acuity and visual quality, decreases myopia and astigmatism, so it lowers your power refractive error, decreases the dependence on contact lenses for clear vision, spares the visual axis, it's reversible, replaceable, and adjustable, so that's another advantage. And since you're not removing any tissue at all, you're not making the cornea weaker. And also it redistributes corneal stress forces, and therefore it possibly also helps in decreasing progression, though you may need further studies for that. So I'll just show you some results, maybe because we are, okay, I think we're about 9 minutes into the presentation. How much time do I have total? Half an hour, is it? Jose?
Don't worry. You can keep going.
I don't want to overshoot time.
No problem.
All right. So you can see here, you can see a patient where the elevation, maximum elevation is decreased from 41 to 21 on the anti-basket sphere. Here you can see a patient who improved from 6/24 part to 6/9 part, and you can see the improvement in the topography from pre to post-op and a decrease in the cylinder. So these are all advantages of CARES. Again, an improvement in the topography from pre to post-op, and a decrease in the sphere and the cylinder from pre to post-op from -4 to -3, and the cylinders decreased from 5 to 2. Here are 330 or 360 degree segments. This is a 330 degree segment, as you can see, placed almost all around. Another 330 degree segment. So again, you can see the improvement in the topography here. Again, a much more regularization of the cone, centralization of the cone, and all these things decrease in the cylinder from almost 8 to 4.9, and from, in this case, from about 5.1 to 1.7, and improvement from 20/400 uncorrected to 20/40 uncorrected. So great improvements you can see using this technique. Here's a patient who was 5 months post-op CARES. This is pre-operative, this is post-operative, and that's the post-op appearance of the patient. And here you can see the difference map in the pentacam, which shows the flattening effect that has been got using the CARES segment. Again, a patient who had cylinders, high cylinders, the central one is pre-op. Oh, sorry, the central one is pre-op, and this is post-op. And this is a difference map, and you can see that you've got a lot of flattening of that cylinder and a regularization of the entire topography, which is exactly in the opposite direction. So his uncorrected improved to 6/9, and you can see we have put in smaller arc lengths in this case. So the arc length is something else that you can change to get varying effects on the cornea. So you can have about 150-degree segments, you can have 120, you can have 90, depending on whether you want to correct more of cylinder or more of sphere. These are things you can do. Here's a patient who had an asymmetric cone. This is pre-operative, this is post-operative. And you can see the difference map by implanting just a single segment. So this is an asymmetric segment implanted only inferiorly. And so we've got a flattening effect inferiorly and an improvement in the topography as well. Here's another asymmetric segment for a inferiorly decentered cone. So you can see he had about 76 diopters steep here. It's come down to about 61 diopters. Difference map shows flattening even up to 14 diopters of flattening. This is a person who's in the entertainment industry, and he's extremely happy with his results because now he can go around with his stage shows and everything, not having to depend on glasses or contact lenses, and he was very happy with his uncorrected visual acuity as well. So that's day 1 post-op. You can see the quiet eye. Again, other examples, this case is interesting to see because you can see the difference in the thickness of the implants from right eye to left eye. Here you've got thicker implants, and so you've got a more, a pronounced effect in the difference map. Here you've got a thinner implants, so you've got a lesser effect. So that's how you can also titrate the amount of effect that you can get. Also, you can see that here, if you look at this, you've got a lot of flattening all around. And in the previously flat area, you've got some steepening, which overall, so you've got a flattening in the previously steep area, and you've got a slight steepening in the previously flat area, all of which leads to a regularization of the topography. And I don't know if I can zoom it up. Yeah, I think I can. Here you can see from a -7 cylinder, the patient is dropped to a 2.5 cylinder, which is a lot of improvement in uncorrected 2120 to 2030. And the other eye, the left eye, because he was happy with the right eye result, he decided to go for the left eye also with a very low value. So here's an example of a patient with advanced keratoconus and early keratoconus, both eyes CARES done, and both eyes very good results. Here uncorrected improved from 2040 part to 2020. And you can see that here you've got a -1, -1.25 cylinder, and this dropped down to a 0.5 cylinder. And in fact, he was uncorrected itself 6/6. So yeah. Here's more examples. I can keep showing you more and more examples. This is a patient who underwent CARES and cross-linking in the right eye. Financial reasons could undergo only cross-linking in the left eye. So you can see the difference here. In the left eye, there's hardly any effect which has been obtained by pure cross-linking alone. But here, when you had got the additional advantage of CARES, you can see flattening in that zone of implantation. She came back after a year because she now wanted CARES to be implanted in the other eye also, in the left eye also. So we went ahead and implanted left eye also CARES, and this was pre-CARES, only cross-linked eye, the left eye, and this is the left eye again after cross-linking. That's the improvement in a cross-linked eye you can see again. Uncorrected improved from 2200 to 2060, and you can see the flattening as well as very quiet eye here with the CARES segments. So again, more examples. Let me just skip these examples, I think. Anyway, the vision improved from 2300 to 2080. This is a patient who otherwise I would have done DALC in, and now that's an interesting thing because now what I do is my number of DALCs has really come down because a lot of advanced cases, what I do is just plain CARES and cross-linking. So my next part of the talk is going to be about CACXL or contact lens assisted cross-linking. And in those patients where I can do a CACXL, which means that they have sufficient thickness to do a cross-linking, what I do is combine it with the CARES, and I've almost stopped doing DALC for such patients. So what the CARES does is you implant the CARES first, it gives you a flattening of the cornea, and then you can proceed with your cross-linking. So it really makes cross-linking much safer. Here's another example, and it also increases the thickness in that mid-peripheral zone, the corneal tissue thickness as well. So these are advantages of combining these two in very advanced cases also. You've got about, in this case, 18 diopters of flattening here. This is pre-CARES and cross-linking. This is post-CARES and cross-linking. You can see the amount of flattening. And so these are some examples of patients where we've completely avoided a DALC fully. These are some more examples, and I just want to probably show you this video because it shows an example of an uh, adjustable adjustability. So this was done the previous day, and we were not we thought that we could get a better topographic effect if we changed the position a little bit more. It was an asymmetric cone, so we wanted to shift it a little bit more, and you can see it is a little difficult to shift because it's already stuck into place because of the capillary action of the endothelium, the dehydration caused by the endothelium capillary action. It sticks into place, but by the next day, if you go ahead and you try to just kind of push it forward, you can get it to change its position, and we did that. So you can also adjust it in the post-operative period. And here's the final position. And you can see the difference in position. So this was at the beginning of surgery, and this is after adjusting the position a little bit. So here are some FD OCTs of the patient. Showing very quiet, well-placed segments at 50% depth, and these are slight microscopic images of. We've done more than 140 patients now. The first 24 were published in Journal of Refractive Surgery, and there are now a lot of doctors around the world who are actually doing CARES now. This is available commercially, the Trefines. So if you order the Trefines, it's possible to do, and I'm very happy to say that it's picked up a lot of traction in US and many other countries around the world. These were the publications, and we saw significant improvement in almost all parameters: uncorrected, best corrected, spherical equivalent, topographic astigmatism, and everything. This is the article again, and it's been featured in a lot of places. And also, as far as reimbursement is concerned, at least in US, it's reimbursable as a lamellar graft or as an ICRS. So it's a tissue transplant, so FDA approval is also not needed for this procedure. So to conclude about CARES, it's an allogenic tissue, so there are no disadvantages of synthetic tissue. It's biocompatible. It's got good corneal integration, less complications, neovascularization, stromal melt, migration, extrusion, all of these don't occur with it. It's easily available and easy to perform, and you can use a pull-through push-in technique. It's economical for us. I don't know how South America corneal grafts work, but for India, the cost that we have to pay for the corneal graft is much lesser than an intact segment as well. So it's economical for the patient, and the patients are really happy with both the effect that they get as well as the cost that they have to pay for it. It's effective, stable, simple, safe, and as I showed you, also reversible, adjustable with a very low level of rejection. So that was my talk about CARES, and I am sorry to say, Jose, but I have kind of lost sense of time about how much time I've spoken.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So if you have more time for us, would be great. So for us, don't worry.
All right. So
if you want, I don't know if you want me to give you the questions that the people have before you continue with
we can do that, and then I can go on to the second talk. We can have the.
Okay, perfect. So, Jose, we can start with the questions.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. So, usually, Susan, what you used to do is just you follow a nomogram, the normal nomogram for ICRS, or do you have your own nomogram?
It doesn't translate completely into the normal nomogram, but the principle is the same. So you can adjust the arc length, which is more difficult to do with a synthetic segment because you have to order them specifically. Here you can just get a cornea and get your own arc length, whatever you like. You can decrease the optic zone. So I've worked from about 5.3, 5.5 optic zone to about 6.5 optic zone. Those are the way that you can adjust the zone. And the best part about it is also, unlike synthetic segments, these patients don't have as much glare, even because it's the use of allogenic tissue. So even if you go narrower, the optic zone, the problem is lesser. And the other thing that you can adjust is the thickness of the segment, how much thick you use, and you can also vary the depth possibly, but I generally keep it as 50%.
Yeah. So when you cut with the double trephine.
Yeah.
You cut the full thickness of the cornea.
Except the epithelium and the endothelium, yes, the full thickness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see another questions here.
I don't know if I can also see the question.
There is a question here about a cross-linking. When you do it simultaneously, you soak the segments as well, or you do it in a normal way? Usually, how do you do?
You know, I soak the segments simply because the segments are there, the riboflavin is there. So I soak it and put it. But if you're doing a simultaneous cross-linking, I'm sure the riboflavin will penetrate through that also when you put it, because you'll have only about 250 microns of stroma probably, or maybe less, 200 microns of stroma, and the riboflavin should penetrate. But it just makes sense to just put it in riboflavin and do it, because then you have better soakage of the segment. So segment possibly theoretically can become harder and firmer and give you better results.
Great. They are always the same thickness? I mean, the trephine, you have different trefines, or?
You have, yeah, we have different trefines, so you can get segments of different thicknesses, and that's another way that you adjust.
Okay.
So basically, we have, yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
We have two trefines thicknesses right now, and depending on our demand for this trefine, and from those two, you can also get it down by just manually cutting it into four segment thicknesses currently. So you can have 0.5, 0.375, 0.5, and 0.75.
Okay. Here, there is another question just asking if you have you ever tried interior marginal degeneration, just to put these segments.
Yeah, I haven't just simply because I've not come across. I mean, after I started doing this, we haven't come across a patient that is thin enough to do this. And possibly other things that you can do it in are all the other ectatic disorders. You could do it for post-classic ectasia, but post-classic ectasia, again, just like to do intact, you would have to be careful that you don't lift up the flap. So you take little wider channels and go deeper, and make sure that you're not, while doing the process of inserting it, not lifting up the flap. The other thing you can possibly do it is even in Moorens ulcers. In Moorens ulcer, if depending, if sometimes you have very thin peripheral area of melt, you could possibly use this to get it, because it's a nice banana shaped piece of segment, that tissue that you do. So these are all areas where you can possibly use it. It's got a lot of potential places where you can use.
Great. What are the limits that you have for you to put these segments? I mean, how thin they can be, or any other limitation that you probably have for these segments just to put them in?
Yeah, so basically, it's like if the keratoconus is progressive, then I would combine it with a cross-linking. And if I can do a cross-linking, then I would always do a CARES. So let me put it this way. In extremely thin corneas, let's say that some of the keratoconus are so advanced that you know that you have to do a DAL. In those cases, I go ahead and do a DAL. But there are cases where it is very steep. The cornea is steep, but it's still not too thin. Now, in those cases, I do a CARES and cross-linking. Now, by too thin, I'll also give an example of a patient. I don't know whether I have it here, but it was a patient who had only 200 and something, 50 or something microns of tissue. That thinnest area was not in the zone of implantation, it was more to the center. But with that amount of thickness, normally you would do a DAL. This is a localized area. What I did, it was a very localized area, not over the pupil. So what I did is, I did not remove the epithelium only in that area of the thin pachymetry. I removed the epithelium in all other areas, and I inserted the CARES, and I also did a contact lens assisted cross-linking, which is what we're talking about next. So all of these to manage that patient, without which maybe 5 years previously I would have done a DAL for that patient without thinking twice about it. But now I did this, and we know that DAL has its own set of problems, complications and issues which need to be sorted out after surgery. But now that I've started doing this, I find that it's a very good way of getting good outcomes for the patient, And also it gives you an opportunity to have something else done before you go to a DALC. So it doesn't rule out a DALC at a later date just because you have done this. So your options are still always open. Most of the patients are very happy with their CARES and cross-linking outcome. And if required, we will not have your option of a DALC. Now, if I can maybe just minimize my thing, I'll see if I have that patients. But you can go and ask me other questions meanwhile.
I think the last question is, I think that there is a little bit of doubt and probably they didn't understand, is one more question.
Francisco Sanchez have very good questions.
Yeah.
So, Francisco, ¿estás tú por ahí?
Sí, si quieres entrar, dale.
Te habilitamos el micrófono para que preguntes a Susan, porque las que me mandaste en privado están muy buenas, todas las preguntas.
Ah, sí, no, aquí sí no llegaron. Susan, there is a doctor right here that wants to ask you something.
Yeah.
Dr. Francisco Sanchez is a big professor here in Latin America.
All right, really.
Francisco.
Okay. Ahí está ya. Hi, Francisco.
Ajá.
Ya, dale. Hola, Francisco, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están?
Hello. Yeah. Hello. Good morning, Dr. Sanchez. Please tell me.
This is Francisco. Very nice to meet you. Congratulations for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm coming out with a very wide idea.
Las preguntas que tenías, Francisco.
Well, yes. I have several questions to your technique. I've been doing for almost 2 decades acrylic segments, and you're right. But if you use femtosecond laser, the complications are less than using manual implantation. However, definitely, I guess the allogenic implantation is a very nice idea. And when you femtosecond laser, what are you using in diameters?
Jose, I'm sorry, I cannot hear because there's some disturbance.
What he's asking is, which parameter do you use for the femtosecond laser when you're gonna do the
dissection?
The dissection, because he's asking. I mean, that probably some people could may use the manual, but nowadays that we use the femtosecond. So, which parameter do you use in this?
What do you mean by parameter? Are you asking me whether I use femtosecond or whether I use manual? I use femtosecond.
No. I mean, what is the diameter that you use?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I use, like I told you, my optic zone, the inner diameter is about 102. Sorry, what am I saying? About 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. Those are the things. Outer diameter would be about, if I'm using 5.5, I would keep it as 7.5. Earlier I used to use a slightly larger optic zone. If that was about 6.5, and then I would keep around 6 and 8 mm. Sorry, not 6.5, 6 and 8 mm I would keep. So I would keep a difference of 2, which gives you a 1 millimeter thick wide tunnel on either side.
And in terms of the three fines, do you have several diameters, or you just fix at one diameter?
No, we have several diameters.
Several diameters, okay. And so do you have a nomogram? Because I saw that you sometimes use shorter segments for astigmatism, or in pellucid you use inferior implantation. Do you have a nomogram to follow?
Yeah, so basically I have not formalized the nomogram as yet, but I'm trying, because many people have asked me this now, so I'm trying to put the thing in place. Currently, it's just basically what you would do for ICRS using the same principles. Look at the position of the cone, the type of the astigmatism. Is it symmetric bow tie? Is it asymmetric bow tie? Is it a completely decentered cone? How much of it is in the central? Is it central cone? Completely decentered cone. For example, here this patient, I think we had put only one segment inferiorly. For this particular patient. This is a patient which I told you I would have done DALC otherwise, but did ICRS. Then the optic zone, if it's very advanced keratoconus, I use a lesser optic zone. If it is advanced, again, I use thicker segments. If I want to decrease the cylinder more, I use 90-degree segments. If I want to decrease the sphere more, then I use 150-degree segments. So basically, those are the general principles of how to decide about doing this. But my depth, I almost always standard keep it as 50%.
Excuse me, which is the minimal thickness that you see for CAIRS technique?
0.25. You can go down to 0.25.
Okay. And where can we get the set of instruments?
Instruments, if you're interested in it, please just send me an email. I will just write down my email here. And please, yeah, you can just feel free to just call me. I mean, just send me a message, or Jose has my number. So just WhatsApp me. That's also fine. And I'll be happy to get you in touch with, getting that instrument.
And the final question is, have you tried CAIRS alone, or you always use combined with crosslink?
No, I've done it CARES alone also in already crosslink patients, as well as, patients who are not progressing. So for these two sets of patients, I have done just plain CARES alone also.
Okay. So you can get effect only with CARES, even without cross-linking?
Yes, absolutely. Without cross-linking, yes, you can, but make sure that it's not a progressive, it's not a patient who's already progressing anyway. So if you have progressing, it just makes sense to combine it with cross-linking also if you have progression, because CARES is going to basically regularize the topography more than CARES is going to be regularizing the topography more than actually helping in stopping progression. So stopping progression is something you definitely want to do, and that is going to be achieved by cross-linking.
I saw that you adjust one case. Was this the day after, or how long? How long you have to make the adjustments?
Oh, that particular case was done the next day. That particular case, we put in that segment, and then we checked the topography the next day. We were not. We thought we could improve the topography further by shifting the position a little bit more. So then we just went ahead and did that. It would have been about slightly less than 24 hours, or slightly less than that. It would have been about 16 to 18 hours, I guess. Because we did it in the afternoon, and then we did a repositioning the next day morning.
Thank you so much for sharing all this interesting idea.
Thank you.
I really like
I put my email here for, if you would like to just note that, or if anybody else is interested, please email me. My WhatsApp is with Jose, so anyone wants to WhatsApp me, please.
For sure, I will send an email to get the set of instruments. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Great, Susan. Thank you very much.
This is a case I just want to talk about. This case. This is a one which I just mentioned in the last about that patient who had very thin cornea. So this was a localized area of very thin cornea. You can see that the stromal thickness is only 230 microns, and the epithelium is 102. So, if you just look at the pentacam alone, you would think that, this is thicker. This is about 230. It would come to about 330 microns. But 102 microns of that is being contributed by pure epithelium. So in this case, normally I would have done a DALC, because this is not normally, sometime back. But now, if you look at it, it was a very localized area. It's not too much. And it was off the pupil. It was around here. It's this blue line, basically. So I just left epithelium in this much zone. I didn't remove it. I removed the epithelium everywhere else. I also put a contact lens, did a CACXL, which I'll talk to you about just now. And I did CARES. So all of that gave me very good results. These are the post-op results. And you can see I've got about 15 diopters of flattening here, 11 diopters of flattening here. And he did well, and he actually came back for his other eye cross-linking also. This was a patient who had cerebral palsy. And he had to be actually brought in on a wheelchair. He had to be lifted from the wheelchair to the examination chair, and he could not walk on his own at all, and he was an adult, so it was very difficult for the caregivers to move him. And for such patients, I think these options are much better, because he improved to 618 uncorrected, and these options are much better because the post-op care that you need for them, and the post-op this thing is much lesser than with the DALC. You need to look at the sutures, look at loosening of the sutures, maybe do suture adjustment and so many things. Your number of post-op visits decreases a lot.
Excellent, beautiful case. So we can probably continue, Susan, with the laptop.
Okay, so my next talk is about CACXL, and this is also important because many of these patients where you do CARES, you have thin corneas. Of course, as I said, you can do CARES for milder cases also. But if you're doing it for the advanced cases and you have thin corneas, you definitely need to do something about that progression also. And this is a technique that I started in 2012, CACXL, and this is again now being done by many centers around the world. There are lots of publications from other centers on this technique, and it's become a popular technique now. And I'll just talk to you about this. So if you look at cross-linking, I think we all know that the photosensitizing effect of riboflavin, it causes the UV threshold for damage is about 0.36 milliwatts per centimeter square. But at the same time, riboflavin, though it decreases, normally it is about 5 milliwatts, but what riboflavin does is it causes UV to cause damage at a much lower threshold, which is at 0.36. But then riboflavin has a dual role. It also has a protective role, which means that if you have sufficient riboflavin saturated substance, which could be either riboflavin saturated corneal stroma or anything like that, above the endothelium, then riboflavin also acts as a sink. It kind of absorbs the UV and brings the UV down to endothelial friendly levels, which is about 0.18. So the level above which endothelial damage occurs is 0.18 milliwatts per centimeter square. So your aim when you do cross-linking should be to not cross 0.18 milliwatts per centimeter square at the level of the endothelium. And to be able to come down to 0.18 milliwatts, you have to have 400 microns of stroma. So this is the reason why you always see this number 400 microns. 400 microns is crucial because 400 microns of riboflavin saturated stroma will bring down UV to safe levels at the level of the endothelium. So you will not get endothelial damage when you're doing cross-linking. If you don't have that, and if you have higher levels, for example, just as an example, at 300 microns, the amount of stroma, that means the 300 micron corneal thickness, the amount of radiation that reaches the endothelium would be 0.37 milliwatts per centimeter square. And we know that the endothelial toxic dose is 0.36. So at 300 microns, if you do cross-linking, you would cause endothelial toxicity. You'd possibly end up having to do a corneal transplantation. These are things that you want to avoid, and that's why you have to make sure that you have 400 microns before you start UV application. So here's a graph which is very commonly used in literature, and this is what it explains. This is a standard resident protocol which uses 3 milliwatts per centimeter square. And when you apply 3 milliwatts per centimeter square, what happens is this is the top of the cornea. This is the bottom of the cornea, 400 microns thickness cornea. Considering 400 microns thickness cornea, here's where the endothelium would come. What happens is because you have riboflavin, which is depicted by yellow here, the riboflavin absorbs the UV and brings it down to a safe 6%, which is less than 0.36, which is about 0.18 actually. And so there's no damage to the endothelium. But what happens when you have only 300 microns of stroma? The amount of UV that reaches is around 12%, which is higher than 0.18. So you get endothelial toxicity, which is what I just explained. And what do we do here? What does CACXL technique do here? CACXL, what it does is that it basically, what I do in this technique is I take a contact lens, a soft contact lens, which does not have a UV barrier. So that's very crucial. You should not take, many of the contact lenses available today have inbuilt UV barriers because these are patients who are just going out. They want to have UV protection. It's good for them. But there are contact lenses which don't have inbuilt UV barriers. So those are the ones you need to take. You soak it in riboflavin. Now the contact lens also has riboflavin in it. Now you place that contact lens on top of the cornea, and so the UV attenuation starts from the top of the contact lens instead of from the actual cornea. So what you have done is you have actually increased the functional thickness of the cornea. You have given an additional layer of riboflavin, which makes up for the the lesser amount of stromal tissue available for attenuating the UV. And so you come down to safe levels of UV at the level of the endothelium, and that's because you have added this additional layer. So what contact lens may be used, we just discussed that. You should not have a UV filter. If you use one with a UV filter, it's obvious you would have ended up doing no treatment at all to the patient because the UV would have never reached the patient's eye. So for knowing which ones you can use, check the product literature. It's always mentioned on that. And also you can use a simple digital UV meter and check the UV transmittance through that. The contact lens that we use is the Bausch & Lomb, and which has been widely studied in literature, is the Bausch & Lomb soft lens, daily disposable. It's made of Filacilcon B. It has a central thickness of 90 microns. We use one of negligible power, which is about minus 0.5 diopters of refractive error, or of power rather. And we know that soft lenses follow the shape of the cornea. So it's very nice when it sits on top of the cornea. It doesn't sit like a rigid contact lens. And also these are hydrophilic, so they absorb riboflavin. Here's an experiment that we did. These are different contact lenses that we placed on tissue paper, and we put riboflavin into the contact lens, and we could see post that the riboflavin passes through the substance of the contact lens and reaches the tissue paper and stains the tissue paper, which proves that riboflavin is actually penetrating into the contact lens. So again, the technique is simple. Basically, you soak the contact lens in riboflavin, soak the cornea also in riboflavin after removing epithelium. I do epi off, so I've removed the epithelium. Dresden protocol is what is being shown here, 3 milliwatts per centimeter square for 30 minutes. But now, for the last many years, I'm doing accelerated cross-linking. When I started out with this technique, it was the standard Dresden, which was applied for 30 minutes. Finally, after 30 minutes, if you're doing accelerated cross-linking, what I do is 10 milliwatts per centimeter square for 9 minutes. That's what I use, which gives you a very good balance of, good stiffening of the cornea, strengthening of the cornea, as well as, a time limit, which is quite acceptable. So what the contact lens does is it gives you about 107 microns of additional corneal tissue. So that's what you get by this of additional riboflavin saturated substance above the cornea. So here's your cornea, here's the contact lens. And so just to understand it simpler, a simple calculation, this is an algorithm that you can follow to determine what you're going to do, what kind of cross-linking you're going to do in the patient. So you check the corneal thickness, the corneal epithelial thickness. You could do an ultrasound ASOST epithelial mapping, or you can just keep it in your mind as a standard of about 50 microns of epithelium. Remove the epithelium, measure the pachymetry. If the pachymetry is more than 400 microns after epithelial removal, you go ahead and do conventional cross-linking or conventional accelerated cross-linking. If the pachymetry is less than 400 microns, you know that you will be in a stage where you may damage the endothelium. So now you go for CACXL. What you do is put the contact lens into riboflavin, soak the cornea also for half an hour with riboflavin. At the end of this half an hour, you again have to measure the pachymetry. And if your pachymetry along with the contact lens is more than 400 microns. Now, it's not necessary that you have to place the contact lens on the cornea and measure. You can just measure the corneal pachymetry alone. If you have 300 microns, at least a minimum of 300 microns of corneal pachymetry after half an hour, you know that the contact lens is going to give you an additional 100 microns. So 300 plus 100 takes it to 400 microns, and that is sufficient. That makes it safe for the cornea. So you can go ahead with CACXL or accelerated CACXL. If on the other hand, you'll have a very small minority of patients where after half an hour, the total functional pachymetry with the contact lenses may still be less than 400 microns, which means that again, you don't have to place the contact lens on the cornea for calculations. You soaked it for half an hour, you measured the pachymetry. Let's say that you come across a pachymetry that's 280 microns. You know that adding the contact lens will make it only 380. So you're still slightly shorter than 400. In these cases, and these are rarer cases, in these cases, what we do is we just put 2 drops of distilled water on the cornea. This gives you, swelling that's very minimal. See, such cases generally don't need large amounts of swelling because 100 microns you're going to get from the contact lens anyway. You need very minimal swelling generally. So about 20-30 microns that you get very fast. You put 2 to 3 drops in about 3 to 4 minutes, you would have got that much of swelling. And then you can place the contact lens and continue with CACXL or accelerated CACXL. Important things to remember are that when you do this, we normally use with riboflavin is available with either Dextran or HPMC. We normally do with the Dextran. That's because we have Dextran available where we are working. But HPMC may be better for thin corneas because of the reason that it does not cause intraoperative dehydration. Dextran is a heavy molecule. It absorbs water from the cornea. So in these thin corneas, it may become even more significant because intraoperatively, when you are putting riboflavin in Dextran for half an hour to soak the cornea, you're also causing some amount of dehydration. So to avoid that in thin corneas, you can possibly use riboflavin in HPMC, hydroxypropyl methyl cellulose. Or the other thing you can do is also use accelerated CACXL, which I said, because your surgical time will come down and your intraoperative dehydration of the cornea will also come down. So in our experiments, we got about 60 to 70% UV transmission through the riboflavin soaked contact lens. So that's basically those experiments. Now there have been other people who've done experiments for CACXL, and these are some of the other contact lenses which can possibly be used for CACXL. But I'll come to that part of it later. Here's the demarcation line seen after CACXL post-op cornea. Here's again after accelerated CACXL post-op cornea. So we don't have any problems with haze or corneal scarring or things like that, provided you have done the intraoperative pachymetry measurements. You could do the intraoperative pachymetry either with an intraoperative ASOC if you have it, or you can go ahead with a an ultrasound A scan probe marking the preoperative thinnest cornea. You need to have an idea where it is from the pentacam or the op scan, and then measure in that area with multiple measurements. Or if you have an excimer laser, and that is the area, if it's your refractive suite you're doing it in, your excimer laser has an intraoperative pachymetry, at least the Alcon has. And also otherwise you can do a pentacam or some means of intraoperative pachymetry measurement is important. Here are IVCM studies which we did on CACXL, and we published it with Cosimo Mazzotta in Journal of Refractive Surgery. The CACXL article also was published in Journal of Refractive Surgery, and we found that it very closely resembles the changes that you get following conventional cross-linking. As I said, now a lot of other people have started doing this. Many studies have come across. Here are some of the studies. This was done by Farhad Hafezi and us. And this is a very interesting study because it says that the increased that actually when you cross-link thinner corneas, you get a better biomechanical effect than cross-linking thicker corneas. And that is because you have higher oxygen availability. So these thinner corneas actually cross-link better and they become stronger. And this is a follow-up study that was done by Sabin Kling and Hafezi. And here you can see murine corneas which are thinner than rabbit corneas, and then porcine corneas are the thickest, which is about 800 microns. And you'll see that the cross-linking effect comes down as the cornea gets thicker. So this is an important thing. So thinner corneas cross-link better than thicker corneas, and you can see that that definite decrease in the cross-linking effect as you use thicker and thicker corneas. So this is also another thing that you need to take into consideration when you read and see and do studies on CACXL or other thin cornea cross-linking techniques, that your porcine model may not actually be the best model to study thin cornea cross-linking, because porcine corneas are really thick. They're about 800 microns. And you need to, if you want to do thin cornea cross-linking studies, you should possibly better use murine corneas because they more closely mimic these thin corneas. So, and they're likely to get you a better equivalent studies to human corneas. This was a study from another center in JCRS, which studied the demarcation line after CACXL and compared dextran with HPMC, and they found that it was slightly deeper in HPMC group, about 300 microns, than in the dextran group, which was about 235 microns. And there was no endothelial cell loss in either group after 6 months in their study. And also this deeper effect of riboflavin with HPMC has also been shown in other studies, not CACXL, but standard cross-linking studies also. HPMC does generally give a deeper demarcation line than dextran. And that's possibly because of better diffusion of riboflavin into the cornea with HPMC than with dextran. Here's another study done by Boris Neazer, which was published in Journal of Refractive Surgery, again on CACXL, 1-year results. And they also found good results with CACXL. They found that it stopped progression in 80%, and they had a few patients it did show progression based on the pentacam criteria, which was used for defining progression. But even in those 4 patients who had progressed, 3 of them had actually improved in their uncorrected visual acuity. And therefore they did not require they were not treated cross-link. They were only observed. Only 1 patient needed who did not improve in uncorrected visual acuity needed cross-linking, but that patient refused to do cross-linking. So that was the result of their study. Here's a study done by Wolenczak et al. Again on CACXL in porcine studies, porcine eyes. But as I said, porcine eyes are not the best model for studying thin cornea cross-linkings. And they found that they basically talked about the technique, importance of the technique of cross-linking. It's important that you don't, most studies have found, and including ours, but these are all studies not in the human cornea, but on experimental porcine eyes or on just based on how much of UV is transmitted through the contact lens. We've all seen that about 30% is the difference between standard cross-linking and CACXL, which means you possibly get about 30% less based on all in non-human eye studies. But human eye studies may be different because of 2 reasons. One is the corneal cross-linking in thin corneas is better than in thick corneas. And second is you actually need to do biomechanical studies using the Corvus or the Aura or something like that to actually see the effect. So however, in this study by Wolenczak et al. On porcine corneas, again they found its effect is about 1/3 less after standard CXL. And basically the importance of technique was that you should not put excess riboflavin, because riboflavin, as I told you, is a sink. It absorbs the UV. So if you have too thicker layer of riboflavin, either above the contact lens or below the contact lens, what happens is all of the UV is absorbed there. So try and avoid that. Do not put any riboflavin under the contact lens, and put only a thin layer of riboflavin over the contact lens, and you don't have to keep replenishing it too often. So these are important parts of the technique. They also studied 3 different contact lenses. There was a Bosch and Lomb, the one that we use standard, Air Optics Aqua, and the Galifa lens. These are 3 lenses. And depending on the hydration that is there of the contact lens, depending on the hydrophilicity and depending on the thickness of the contact lens, they found different effects. So now if you are doing, if any of you is interested in doing CACXL, remember that most of the humanized studies have been done using the Bosch and Lomb soft lens, with which we have a track history of now 8 years, and we found it to be very safe, with very effective results, very low level of progression or repeat cross-linking required, and they have been shown to be safe for the endothelium. If you are going to use any other kind of contact lenses, make sure that one is it does not shield too much of UV. You get sufficient riboflavin going, and second is that it doesn't cause excess UV to pass as well, depending on your thickness of the cornea, causing endothelial loss. So this is just some things that you need to keep in your mind. This is a study done by Brad Randleman, who's an editor of Journal of Refractive Surgery, again on CACXL. And I'll jump through this. Basically, it was published on the cover page of ISRS also. And it showed that cross-linking, so there was a concern raised by someone that cross-linking is actually happening to the contact lens and not to the cornea below it. But then this study showed that cross-linking was actually happening as, not in the contact lens. It was not an anterior shift of the cross-linking. Rather, it was a blunted response, which means about 30% less. This was also a porcini study, about 30% less than standard cross-linking. So this is basically before cross-linking and after cross-linking. You can see this is a Brillouin microscopic study. This was the thickness, the strength of the cornea before cross-linking. This is the strength of the cornea after cross-linking, and you can see the increase in strength mostly in the anterior and middle layers, and also slightly in the posterior layers. The same is after CACXL. So this one was after standard CXL. This is after CACXL. Again, you can see very similar results. This is pre-crosslink, pre-CACXL. This is post-CACXL. Again, you can see the increase in stiffness in the anterior and middle layers, and not much in the posterior layer, which is similar to what you get after standard CXL, anterior and middle layers, and not the posterior layer. So this proved conclusively that cross-linking was giving a stiffening effect to the cornea in CACXL as well. And this was similar to the standard CXL, except that it was a slightly blunted response. It was decreased as compared to the standard cross-linking by about, so basically it achieved about 71% of the stiffening effect of standard CXL. So I think, yeah, that brings me, I think that's the end of my, talk. Thank you so much. So these are some, just continue.
Amazing talk, Susan. Thank you very much. It was amazing. I think that you gave us a lot to think, to know. We appreciate your experience to share with us. It was amazing. Really, really amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jose. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Jose, for this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
No, thanks to you. I don't know if the people have some questions. ¿Alguna pregunta a alguien? No sé.
Ahorita estoy checando las preguntas que nos están mandando.
We are just checking the questions they have in the other channels in Facebook and YouTube. ¿Alguna? Si no, para terminar.
No, yo creo.
So, thank you very much, Susan. I think that we are done. It was amazing to have you right here with us. We learned a lot, and I think that we are gonna. I'm gonna contact you later just to do some research or so. And we would love to have you probably next year in our conference. We will let you know.
Love to come, provided Corona allowed.
Yeah, no, later in next year.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jose. And Dr. Francisco, I've just seen on the chat your email ID. I'll definitely reply to you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.